Dr. Angela Drummond Matthews, and welcome to Week 2 of World Literature 1. I hope you enjoyed reading creation stories last week. This week, we'll focus on hero stories. We all love the hero stories as the popularity of Marvel and DC, or anime, would suggest. But stories of heroes are some of the earliest stories ever told. Joseph Campbell, a scholar of mythology, showed in his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces that all of the hero stories throughout human history are really the same basic story. He called it the hero cycle, and it goes something like this. The hero is living in the world when something happens that forces the hero to stop his or her normal activities and to take on a new goal. This is the call to adventure. Sometimes the hero refuses the call and must be convinced by a mentor or by circumstances to take the quest. Then, the hero must leave a place of familiarity to go to a place of unfamiliarity. This is called crossing the threshold. The threshold is a barrier or boundary between the world of the familiar and the new unknown world. It's often symbolized by a natural boundary like a body of water or going into a forest. Once the hero has crossed the threshold, he or she enters a period of initiation. Here the hero faces many trials and must learn lessons. The hero suffers temptations and failures but gets stronger as he or she goes along. Finally, things get about as bad as they possibly can get, and the hero faces a devastating defeat, maybe even death or apparent death. If the hero can overcome this, he or she receives a boon or a gift. It could be wisdom, new power, spiritual enlightenment, or a special weapon. The gift allows the hero to return to the known world, overcome the nemesis that threatens the world, and finally rest in the regular world, ready to prepare for the next adventure. You might have noticed that several stories you already know fit this pattern. We're going to look at early examples of this pattern from antiquity. First, we'll look at the story of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh takes place in ancient Mesopotamia, where current-day Iraq is found. Mesopotamia is the land between and around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Gilgamesh is one of the earliest surviving written works of literature. Gilgamesh is a king, but he's a really bad king. He gains a companion who accompanies him on a long journey in which he learns several important lessons. We won't be reading his whole journey, just the beginning. But in the latter part of the story, Gilgamesh goes to meet a man who survived the Great Flood. That's right, the same flood as in the Christian Bible. The flood story in Gilgamesh predates the Bible story by 2,000 to 3,000 years. Next, we'll read selections from the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. It has a lot of Greek mythology associated with it. It takes place in Greece and Troy, which is assumed to be in modern-day Turkey. The war starts with Helen, a beautiful Greek woman who was supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world. All of the leaders in Greece wanted to marry her, but they were quarreling amongst themselves. They finally decided that whoever did marry her would be defended by everyone else should she be stolen away. King Menelaus won the opportunity to marry her, and everything was settled until a visit from the Trojan royal family. King Priam of Troy comes to visit with his sons Hector and Paris. When Paris sees Helen, he falls madly in love, and she falls for him. They decide to run away together back to Troy. When the Trojans leave Greece with Helen, there's a declaration of war. all the other Greek kings who have vowed to defend Menelaus gear up for war with Troy. The war lasts 10 years. The Iliad picks up in the latter days of the battle. Achilles, who's an extremely strong warrior and part god, has refused to fight anymore because he believes the leader of the troops, Agamemnon, has slighted him. This has handicapped the Greek forces and they're losing ground. Achilles' best friend and cousin decides to take Achilles' armor and go to fight anyway. When he's killed in battle, Achilles becomes enraged and re-enters the fight. After the battle at Troy, we'll see what happens to another of the battle's leaders, Odysseus. The Odyssey tells the story of how Odysseus takes 10 years to get home to Ithaca from the Battle of Troy, a journey in which he travels to places all over the Mediterranean Sea, goes through a number of trials, and learns lessons about his hubris or pride. At the same time, his son, waiting for him at home, learns lessons about coming of age. Next, we'll move from Greece to the West African nation of Mali to read about Sunjata, a legendary king. This story takes place in the area comprising current-day Mali, Guinea, Senegal, and other nations. The story of Sunjata follows his journey from being exiled to growing into a strong leader. He is finally asked to return to his homeland, which has been overtaken by a foreign king. Sunjata returns and leads his countrymen in a battle that defeats the usurpers. He then becomes king of the Mali Empire. Some people say that this is the true inspiration behind Disney's Lion King. Last, we'll read from the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf. Beowulf takes place in Scandinavia, where we find modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. It's believed that these stories were carried by Germanic tribes to England with the migration of the Angles and the Saxons. Scholars believe it to have been written down sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries. You'll notice a mixture of pagan and Christian symbolism, suggesting that it may have been an oral tale later transcribed by Christian monks. In the story, Beowulf, a member of the Germanic tribe called the Geats, visits the kingdom of the Danes and battles the monster Grendel, who's been attacking the Danes. Later, he fights Grendel's mother, and later still, after he's become king of the Geats, he fights a dragon. Scholars think that all of these stories, and the ones from last week, began as oral tradition. In oral tradition, stories are memorized by poets or bards and told over and over again, sometimes set to music. You might notice in some of the stories there's a certain amount of repetition. Think of those as repeated lines in a song. Not only did repetition help the bard to remember the tale, but it went along with the music. It's hard to know for sure if a certain story was passed down orally and for how long. But scholars look for clues about the story from other written works. While you read, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's hearing these stories ages ago. The poet or bard or griot would come into town. There was no TV and no books. This was some of the best entertainment to be had. The people would make a feast, and everyone would sit down to hear the poet sing the history and heroic stories of the land. After you've read these works, you'll write another comparative analysis. Choose 2 or more works to compare. Use quotes from both primary and secondary sources to back up your ideas. Remember to think about why it is important to compare these works. What are the implications of looking at them side by side? What do we learn from comparison that we would not get from looking at the works individually? Remember, this week you'll have another discussion question. You'll also have an oral discussion assignment. You will get with your group members and discuss the works. You can use Blackboard Collaborate or a similar app and record your session as you talk about the readings. Google Hangout, Facebook Rooms, Skype, or FaceTime have similar features. If you don't want your voice to be heard, you can also use the chat function in Blackboard Collaborate or in another app and turn in the transcript or screenshots of your discussion. Then you have the option to meet with me at noon on Friday in Blackboard Collaborate for class discussion. That's all for now. As always, email me if you have any questions. Have a great week. Bye-bye.